everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club. We are your host this evening. I'm Tobias, and this is Will. If you guys want, there's like all these seats up in the front, so you can get like super close view of these beautiful and fascinating shots from Geoffrey Hiller. Just saying, they're there and available and free. It's fine if you're nervous and you need to sit in the back, I understand.
As attendees of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club, you're all now members, provided you adhere to our philosophy.
Ex Curiositas Scientia.
We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual noviceship. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice.
This is our flag and our mascot, Franklin. The lightning bolt represents the receipt of knowledge, the enlightenment of illumination, the resonance of truths understood. It awakens and excites us and makes us hungry for more. And I wanted to remind all of you guys that our first Curiosity Club offsite is at the Hollywood Theater this Monday, coming up, called Fun with Factual Failures. As our slogan goes, we admit it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice. Part of good noviceship is asking questions, and we're taking our questions to the stage. Throughout life, human beings are presented with de facto truths that are actually totally erroneous. These untrue truths may come from pervasive misunderstandings within culture. They may be handed down through institutional systems like education, government, or religion, and sometimes they come straight from a trusted authority figure like a parent. Big or small, they deserve to be questioned. We've asked a power panel of Curiosity Club alumni to share some of the best and worst facts they've ever come across. They will discuss the historical situations that led to these misconceptions, the proof that these truths are actually false, and their thoughts and feelings on living these lives. Our speakers are Chris Higgins, author, architect and professor Nora Wendell, poet and educator Coleman Stevenson, theoretical astrophysicist and professor Ethan Siegel, Niall McGoey, the proprietor of Hovercraft Amplifiers, children's book deconstructivist Charles Boardman, and K. Mike Merrill, publicly traded person. Please check out the website for more info, and there's tickets available now on the Hollywood Theater website, and it's only $5, which is a steal. All right, Curiosity Club is made merrier by our fellow artisans at Fort George Brewery in Astoria, Oregon. And with all of that being done, let's give a warm Curiosity Club welcome to Geoffrey Hiller.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. And it was about 9 months ago during Design Week that I stumbled upon the Curiosity Club. And I was really impressed with what Tobias and Will, their approach is very eclectic and unpretentious. And when they invited me to show my work from Burma, I said, no, that would be great. I don't usually present in venues like this, but I thought that it would work because a huge part of the work that I do stems from curiosity, and the traveling that I do and photography has been a way for me to discover the world and at the same time discover parts of myself. It's an examination. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Burma, or I'm not sure how to say Myanmar or Burma. The book is titled Myanmar, Daybreak in Myanmar. The name of the country was changed in 1989 from Burma. And so there's a little bit of controversy. The government changed it. So I'll go back and forth. I first went to Burma in 1987, and back then, tourists were only allowed to stay for 7 days. And it was a very, very isolated country, and a very beautiful country. It was very, very different from places like Thailand or Laos or Vietnam. It was much more isolated and very, very, very poor and very, very repressive. There was a military dictatorship that was in control of the country since the early 60s. So for 60 years, the country has been very, very isolated. And this photograph, I think, can give you a little bit of an example. You know, they would smoke these cigarettes, and they didn't even have matches. They would light the cigarettes from a rope. And I think what you're going to see in these photographs is, in showing them, I've noticed a kind of a mixture between a kind of a heaviness at first, and then a beauty, a real magical aspect. I didn't pose these pictures. I just, found these pictures. Yes, and this was at an initiation for Buddhist monks, novitiates, and this was just a scene that I came upon. And back there, I want to talk a little bit about photography also. There's a lot of different themes that run through the talk. Back then, I was shooting film, of course, so there was a lot more challenges to get these kinds of images. I had to push the film to 8 or 1600. Now with digital, it's so much easier. But there's a slow factor that comes into play with photography that I really think is very important that people don't forget, because it's so easy to shoot quickly and not process. So this was shot in 2000. And back then, I returned. It had been 13 years. I went back, and I did a web documentary called Grace Under Pressure. And it really reached a lot of people here in the United States who had never heard about Burma. And ironically, it was through the tech community that spread the word, which is kind of interesting. The web was a very different place back then. And frankly, newspapers like the New York Times and USA Today didn't really get the web back then. And it was more of the design tech community that were experimenting more and really embraced the work. So that was great to get the audience to see this work. And it's funny, just people's habits back then were so different. I remembered, receiving, hundreds of emails, each week saying, "Oh, I'd never imagined what this could be like," and people were genuinely touched. Whereas now we're living in a time where, with social media, things are moving so quickly that, in a way, I don't know. There's a price, in other words, I think, for the way we're consuming things. So what I'm trying to do is find a balance between the old technology, slowing down, and then also using the new technology. So this was in 2011. This was a very pivotal time. And I was in Myanmar training photojournalists, and it was still, the government had not really opened up to democracy. There was a very delicate balance in being there. I had to keep a very low profile. And it was, ironically, it's just very interesting to try and explain, it was the monks who were leading this transition to democracy. And in fact, 4 years before that, there was the Saffron Revolution in 2007, when thousands of monks were killed, were demonstrating, and some were killed in the street for democracy. And now, it's very strange what's happening. If you've been following the news about the Rohingyas, which are Muslims, Burma is a Buddhist country predominantly. It is in fact the monks who are trying to have the Rohingyas leave the country, and there's a huge tension. There's an extreme movement called 969 of Buddhist monks. But that's another question we could talk about later, and because I have some very strong feelings about them, about how I believe, in fact, it's the government that is really manipulating the situation. Because people are confused by, we think of Buddhism as a very loving religion, and why are they fighting and wanting to get rid of the Rohingyas? Back to the daily life, and that's really what I do when I'm out photographing. For me, light, still, composition, and moment are really what makes a photograph powerful. And so I'm out very, very early in the morning, and in Myanmar, you know, it's very close to the equator, so throughout the year, the sun rises at 6 in the morning and it sets at 6 in the evening. And they don't have that long, beautiful period like we have of dusk when that light is so magical. So you really have about 10 or 15 minutes of what we call the magic light. And so that's the time when I'm out and really concentrating on making those images. So this is in a madrasa. I was talking a little bit about the Rohingya, who are Muslims. And besides the Rohingyas, there's a very large Muslim population in Burma, about 10%. And I had been to this very small town 10 years before. And when I made this photograph in 2012, the teacher of the madrasa was very, very aware that I was present. Because I shoot a lot with wide-angle lenses. I don't stand, and even if I didn't, let's face it, you know, I stand out. You know, it's obvious that I'm a tourist, a traveler. But I want to say it's very important how people in some countries they give you something that is really precious. There's a trust. I don't speak the language, but yet there's an understanding. It's true. I've been around long enough to know it's true. And can you imagine if I tried to do that here in Portland at a middle school? You know, I know what would happen. It's all, you know, it happened last week, and the woman was very, very nice about it. But sometimes it's not so nice, and how people are very, I don't know, it's ironic because here we are in a very, very privileged state, and yet people are very nervous about their security, and they think, you know, you're trying to show them in a bad light. I think it actually maybe goes deeper than that. Well, maybe because United States, it's a very, in the general scheme of things, we are a very young sort of a country, and maybe the people, they don't, in a place like Southeast Asia, there's a long tradition, and maybe that comes through sort of a wiseness. So back to the magic hour, this is the time when I'm really tuned into what's happening around and trying to capture those ephemeral moments that are sometimes a little bit mysterious. And that's okay. It's not really hardcore photojournalism what I'm doing, but I hope there's a kind of a truth that comes out through the pictures. You know, in looking at these photographs, maybe you can pick up on, there are these private moments that I look for. I started out as more of a portrait photographer, and so it would often asking people what we used to call environmental portraits. But to be frank, that got a little bit repetitive. It's very important for photographers to grow from what they do, to try and challenge themselves. So at this particular time when I was going back, I was trying to capture these moments, these private moments. And sometimes they could be a little bit melancholy. Going home from work, waiting for the bus with these beautiful pagodas in the background. So this is a photograph of Aung San Suu Kyi, who, by the way, is going to be 70 years old this Friday. It's hard to believe. When I first went there, she was in her 40s. She went back, she was living in England, and her mom was very sick. And when she went back, she saw what was happening. There were huge demonstrations in 1988. There were people killed in the streets. And she decided to stay. She sacrificed her life. And she's considered an icon like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King. And now it's a very peculiar situation in the last few years. Now that she has a seat in Parliament, in the past few years, with this transition to democracy, she's become quite controversial in that she's not saying anything about the Rohingya. She has a very close relationship with the military. Her father was a general, a very iconoclastic. He was like the Washington or the Abraham Lincoln of Burma. So the people have this great respect, admiration, and love for her. But yet, she's not saying anything. When journalists ask her about the Rohingya, she talks about rule of law. And she does not sound like the all-loving icon that people thought of her just a few years ago. This photograph I made, she was released from house arrest in 2011, and the following year she was campaigning, and I happened to be in the same town where the campaign was taking place. And there's a picture of her father, General Aung San, and that's Aung San Suu Kyi. This flag, it's the National League for Democracy. It's a peacock. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about how this photograph came about. I was talking before about the kind of work that I do. It really is street photography. And I get to these events before the action. She arrived at 10 o'clock, followed by press from all over the world. But I like to get to the situations early and kind of roam around on the fringe, kind of like the street photographers from the 60s, Gary Winogrand, Lee Freelander. Those were the people who I kind of grew up with. So that's sometimes my approach to just showing this kind of moments before that the news media doesn't go for. Oh, so most people, the first question is, what are they wearing on their face? It's called Tanaka, and the men and women, for the most part, women wear it. It's from the bark of a tree. It's a paste, and it's worn as a sunblock and also as a makeup, a beautifier. So it's quite striking. There are no other countries that I've been to where people wear that. And again, to talk a little bit about just the photography part of it, obviously I'm shooting digital these days, but I shoot mainly with a 35mm lens. It's a semi-wide angle lens, but it's the lens I feel most comfortable with because it enables me to get a little bit closer. And photography, the composition is so important. And when you move the camera a fraction to the left or right or up or down, it really changes the relationship of the way the image looks. So I'm kind of tall, and if I would have shot down, it would be a very different photograph. So I had to crouch low to the ground to get that. And it's a matter of waiting for that moment. Again, it's the same thing. All these people were piled onto a public minibus, and it was just waiting for that moment when she was introspective like that without looking at me. playing around with reflections. That was very strange, sort of a market. There was a gigantic armoire in the middle. I don't know what it was doing there, so I shot into the mirror. And this was at the end of the day. There was very, very little light, and it was an umbrella repair shop. I don't know if you can see it too well, but I was just waiting for the little boy. I knew one senses when you're in a situation where you could see a photograph unfolding, and that's really the time to not hold back, to just try and capture these different gestures, because it really changes everything. And so the combination of the light and the way the people were sitting, it's kind of hard to see it on the screen like that. The nuances don't really come out. So when I was working like this, when I make these trips, I've been back to 8 times. Since 2011, I've been to Burma 5 times. I usually go for about a month because that's how long the visa is good for. And I photograph a lot in the early morning and the late afternoon. And I don't edit my film while I'm on the road, because I think that would almost be too much. I think it's important to have the time to look at the pictures after and to reflect on the pictures instead of immediately, taking a picture and just sending it out. And it's very seductive, because I've been using the iPhone lately, and it's quite extraordinary in what it can do. But at the end of the day, if you're constantly just on Instagram and social media, they're very quick. You just move from one to the next, and there's very little time. So I'm a little bit excessive in just trying to perfect it, just getting that moment. And it might not mean anything to other people, but for me it does mean something, and I kind of hold on to that. I have been holding on to that belief of just making the most powerful image as possible. And so I'll wait, like this one. It's not coming through as well as in the print, but there are moments that they're worth remembering, I like to think. This was on the ferry boat, and this was during that time I was telling you in 2012 when Aung San Suu Kyi, there were pictures of her. Just 6 months before, while I was in Burma, you couldn't show pictures of her. People were very, very quiet, and they couldn't say anything because they'd be put in jail. So things really changed in a very short period, the end of 2011, when, in fact, I must say, it was the United States government that was very influential in getting the government to open up a little more. Hillary Clinton was there, and that was one of the things that she really wanted to change, to have the government more democratic. There's a lot of questions, a lot of things to talk about since then. What's happened? Has it really changed? Yes, some things have changed, but there are other things that a lot of people say that the generals really just took off their uniforms and now are making more and more money than ever. They are filthy, filthy rich, and there are huge multinationals, businesses going in to Burma right now, Coca-Cola, other large companies. It's the last frontier, and real estate in Rangoon is just as expensive as Manhattan and London. So go figure, with the general population, they have so little. So this is the old, Rangoon is a very interesting city. It's unlike other capitals in Southeast Asia that are more modernized now, but it's already, the architecture was from when the British were there, and it's very dilapidated. And I don't want to romanticize the conditions that people live in these buildings, because plumbing isn't up to code. So there are people working to try and balance the old traditional architecture and also making it appealing for tourism as well, but not losing the aesthetics of the place already. Burma is truly a multicultural country. We like to talk about that here in the States, multicultural this, multicultural that, whereas in fact, it really is a living, breathing phenomenon there. This is a South Indian temple. This is all like within the radius of a few miles from each other. This is Chinese New Year. This is a Baptist church. And of course, the Muslim population in Yangon. And like I said before, mainly predominant Buddhist country, and the temples are fantastic. You go into these places and you can't help but feel this powerful tranquility. And that's why I really believe that what's happening right now with what they call the 969 movement of extremist monks is really being fabricated by the government. Photography is really about intuition and trying to be open to what's happening around you. So people put a great deal of value in numerology and palm reading. In fact, the government in 1988, when they had that massacre in the streets, that was August 8th, 1988. And they have a belief in the power of numbers, and very suspicious. And in fact, when I was there the first time in '87, they devalued the currency because it ended with a 9. It was not an auspicious number. So people lost all of their savings. This is on the ferry to a small town across the river. And this was in 2012. You won't be seeing a lot of photographs like this from now on, because one of the main differences in the last few years is the popularity of mobile technology. It's changed very, very quickly. So people have smartphones, and it's affordable. In 2011, a SIM card cost close to $5,000. So it was only for very wealthy people and people in the government. And now you can get that same SIM card for $2. And so people have the technology, and that's impacting photographers. A lot of the photographers that I was teaching back in 2011, they used to joke with me. I would talk about point and shoot cameras, and they would say, no, in Burma we don't have point and shoot. We have point and run, because the police, the military, if you took a picture, you can get into a lot of trouble. Well, those photographers now There's a lot of opportunities that are opening up for them in this global world of ours and in this digital world of ours. It really, maybe we don't notice it so much here. Well, now we can, tweet more, or I don't know, look at things on Facebook, and yes, the medium is the message, but oftentimes it's what you're saying with the medium. And I like to think that the people in Burma or the people in Bangladesh or in certain parts of the world, they use those media tools to create social change and not just talk about what people are wearing. There's some of that also, of course, especially amongst the young guys. This is a pickup truck. That building in the background, there was construction going on. That building right now is a very, very futuristic circular building, something even more than you'd see here in Portland, just in the change of 2 years. But yet when you leave the city and you go into the small towns, things seem frozen in time still. I often go back to the same neighborhoods when I return to Yangon. And this is a kind of a typical scene in the early morning. That man on the right, I'm sure, is younger than I am, but you could see how skinny he looks. And he's listening to a transistor radio, probably listening to a broadcast, The Voice of America. A lot of people, that's how they get their news, because the news from the inside the country is not as open. That's changing. Yeah, the backstory for this photograph was she is a bride. She's waiting for her groom to arrive. And next to her is a graduate from local college. And it's in a beauty salon. It was very, very early in the morning. And I walked in and I saw this scene in front of me. And it was like, oh my God, this is extraordinary. So I asked if it was okay to take the photograph, and I didn't want her to pose and look at me, so she was very patient and a little bit preoccupied, to be honest, because the groom was not, he was late, so she had a lot to worry about, but I was there and I just was able to get about a dozen frames. And for me, what adds to this photograph is the fact that it was in the town called Migdala in March of 2013, and it was in that town where tens and thousands of Buddhists and Muslims were fighting, and dozens of people were killed, and that was kind of the beginning of the conflict between the Buddhist and Muslim tension. Those are the same young women leaving the beauty salon. And this is very typical, what they call like a shop house, where people have little grocery stores or places where they sell cigarettes and what have you, and then they live upstairs. So this particular scene, this was not a coincidence. I saw these two men, and I was struck by, the similarities, the way they were sitting in the little tea shops, those little stools. And I actually was waiting just for that moment when they were pouring their tea. What we used to call a decisive moment. And I include this photograph because sometimes photographers, we get worked up in trying to I sometimes try really hard to make a photograph that's important. I was inside of a church and nothing was happening. And a very good friend of mine, photographer, used to say sometimes the photograph you're looking for is behind you. So it's kind of a Zen way of thinking, to just sort of relax, and then sometimes things come to you. And when I turned around, this is what I saw. They were Kachin youth inside of a church service. Kachin are minorities, one of the many minorities in Myanmar. They're at war with the Burmese government. When I show this photograph in Burma, when I was back last January, all the Burmese photographers say, "How did you get that photograph?" Because usually the schoolmasters, they don't allow the students to be photographed. I was just walking by, and it was early in the morning during assembly, so I was able to get a quick frame off of that. There's just a few more. This is to show, again, part of it is the technology. I'm amazed by these cameras in being able to get a photograph. There was so little light. It was pitch dark. It was about 5:30 in the morning, and there was just one single light bulb, and I was able to get this photograph. This was in 2013. And I have a few more photos left before we open it up to discussion from my most recent trip in January 2015. It had been 2 years since I had returned. I was very busy during those 2 years publishing the book. We did a Kickstarter in October 2013, and the following year, October 2014, we had books. We published a book. So that was a whole other journey, and that's part of the talk. We can have a discussion about that because getting the book together was something I always wanted to do. This is the first book I've ever published, and now it's a very interesting time for books, and especially photography books. But I went back to Shwedagon. That's the huge, huge, beautiful pagoda in Yangon, and that's the heart of Buddhism, Shwedagon Pagoda. For people all over Burma, people from all over the country go there. And when I went back this time, everybody had smartphones and iPads, and they were doing this, photographing each other like we do here, not any different. And there were tourists everywhere with those selfie sticks. And it was a very carnival-like atmosphere. It was Christmas Day in 2014 when I arrived, and I spent the whole day there. And it was a very nice atmosphere with all those phones. And when I go back to Myanmar, I always like to go to visit new places, and now new places are opening up. When I first went, you can only go to a handful of places. Now there are new locations, and this was in the Delta. Not very far from Yangon. And in 2008, there was a cyclone that struck the Delta, and it's horrible to say it, just to use that number, it's unimaginable. 140,000 people were killed. And what was even equally as horrific was the way the government responded. They wouldn't allow aid to come into the country. They wanted to ignore it, like, oh, we don't need your help, we could take care of it, and they did nothing. So it's the Burmese people, they're the ones that always help each other, because there is no safety net there, and there still is not now. There's no kind of social security or welfare. People rely on each other. And same town, the top of the temple was collapsed during Cyclone Nargis, and it still has not been repaired. It was a fantastic town. Besides that, I'm telling you all these hard things about how people live, but yet it was an incredible experience being there, and how people, again, their trust and culture, being allowed to see that. This is in another small town. You can't really appreciate it with the light, but just the different kinds of, there's a person here combining the different light source. These are bougainvillea. They're very bright red. Take my word for it. In 2015, this is the kind of scene that I would often see in 1987 of teenage girls carrying stacks of bricks. And so it's still happening, except she's wearing a bonnet. There's a lot of smoke and haze you can't see it in the reproduction, but it's that moment towards the end of the day. And so I call this photograph, illusion and reality, because it really is not what it appears to be. From where you're sitting and when you look at that picture, I don't know, does anyone want to say anything, what they think is going on? I'd be curious. What was that?
A performance?
It was a performance, yeah. It was a performance. There was a young boy who was dancing.
Was it some kind of coming of age thing?
Yeah, well, it was more like a staged performance. It was a government performance. I stumbled upon this scene. It was early in the morning in front of the market, a large market in a Muslim neighborhood, and there were about 5 guys with video cameras. They looked like they were government news organizations, and they were filming these kids dancing, and it was very lovely. It looked very, very authentic with the way they moved their hands and the music. But it was all sort of staged. And then all of a sudden, the music stopped, and some of the guys who were from, it looked like political officers, they started throwing candy, at the crowd. And the people in the background were just running for the candy. And then the boy was just kind of standing very pensive-like, and I really tried to show, like, underneath you could see the shirt, the way it's worn away, and how things sometimes aren't the way they appear to be. So to show the contrast between this amazing attire and the way he's made up, very royal, like a little prince, with the bare reality of the people in the background. This was back in the Delta. And this is what they call a Nat Pui, which is an animist-like religion that predates Buddhism. And I spent a night during this performance. I hadn't seen one of them in about 20 years, and it reminded me very much of some of the religions you see in Africa or South America, where they worship different deities, and they get into it. Basically, several of the people in the photograph are transvestites, and they're mediums. They take on the different qualities of different deities. So there was a lot of very, very, very loud music and dancing and sacrifices. And these are people who are, back in the 80s, they were protesting. That man on the left is a lawyer, and a lot of these older men really wanted me to come and sit down and talk with them, just to talk about what's been happening in Burma in the last few years. And I must say, if you asked me, for the most part, out of the hundreds of people that I meet and talk to, overwhelmingly people are not happy with the way things have changed. You know, the government likes to talk about democracy and how, and things have, censorship has been lifted, but living conditions are the same. And the Burmese there, they have a very funny way of expressing, even though English isn't their first language, but they have ways of kind of very self-deprecating and talking about themselves, kind of making a joke about things. It happens over and over again. So whenever I get inside of a taxi, I knew, like, oh, I'm going to be treated to some kind of a very candid conversation. And like one cab driver would say to me, "Oh yeah, Burma, you know, the country of no complainers," you know, as if, like, you know, things are really, really not really that much different, but we just sort of we take it, you know, we don't complain. So. This was in an auto repair shop that kind of doubled as a house. And this is in the very, very early morning, just as the sun is coming up along the railway tracks. These women are selling flowers. And it was something like ASA 6400. Hardly any light, but no reason, no need to use a flash or anything. And that ends the presentation. I look forward to taking your questions about this extraordinary country. Yes?
So what prompted you to go there in the first place, in the first trip?
Yeah, the reason, it was part of a larger trip that I had made in 1987 when you can only go for 1 week. And I was really struck by this culture and people, how inviting they were. They had been so isolated from the rest of the world. Leaving San Francisco and going to Thailand, there was a greater difference from Thailand to Burma than there was from San Francisco to Thailand. There was very little cars, and it was just very, very isolated. So culture was very rich, and people were quite striking. So it made me want to go back, and it was 13 years later when I went back in 2000 to do Grace Under Pressure, to go in deeper and try and transmit what was happening, because in 1 week we hardly had time to sleep. We just kind of went from place to place and just had an inkling of how bad things were. And it's kind of like that now. You go there and it's so mesmerizing that sometimes it's hard to believe that the situation is so dire, because people have that optimistic kind of viewpoint, way about them, joking. But when you actually sit down and talk with them, and they tell you what's going on, another picture emerges. Will?
I was just wondering, you visited so many times, I feel like probably met a lot of friends, like people you visit again when you come back maybe. Has anybody ever been able to visit you here? Have you ever had that experience, being able to share like the other side of it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Not to Portland. There's been a few photojournalists that have been able to make trips now to Japan and Hong Kong, now that there are more opportunities for them to travel, but not to the States. It's a good question. I hope someday they'll have that chance to get a chance to see what life is like here. And yeah, it is, now when I go back, again, through the power of connecting with people on social media, it's great to be able to meet up with people in in a way that would have been impossible before. And everybody uses mobile phones, and people get together just like they do here, and sometimes in a very impromptu, very quick sort of a way, like let's just all meet up in another hour or so. So that was great to have that happen last January. Yes.
So many people in the photos aren't making eye contact with you, but I imagine you look like a strange outsider. So how do you get these like awesome 1,000-yard stares at the people? Are you just waiting until they don't think they're taking a photo?
Yeah, they're clearly aware I'm there, because like I said, it's pretty wide angle, but yet I see it as a kind of it's okay. It's okay. I think they pick up on my intention, and I guess I'm a bit of a romanticist in a way. When I in my photography, I do really try and show mainly what's beautiful around me, and it certainly is the case in Burma. When and even in a scene like this, it has to do with the way people carry themselves. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit turned off. Even here in the States, back in the 80s, there was a kind of I was talking a little bit before about Lee Freelander and Gary Winogrand. They call them the New American Topographics, especially on the West Coast. It's a little bit kind of cynical, cutting edge. Frankly, kind of making fun of people, critical, which there is that, yeah. But I always sort of gravitated more towards like the East Coast, New York, European, kind of more humanistic. Back in the day, it was called concerned photography, and that was the kind of photography that I felt a kinship with, and that's the reason why I would, when I saved up money, I would make those trips and go to Europe, go to South America, lived in Brazil, because I sensed there was something, I don't know if genuine is the right word, but more humanistic. So that's what I try and show. And it's kind of tricky to do that here sometimes. And I'll just talk a little bit briefly. I'm working on a project here in Portland, which I don't shoot that much, but it's a perfect iPhone project, first of all. I think it's just great for it because it's very casual and it's sort of off the cuff. But sometimes people are a little bit discomforting when they see the camera. So with the phone, it's a little easier, I think, to try and capture those moments. It'll be interesting to see the way it turns out. Yes?
What made you think that the government might be involved with the 969 movement or fomenting the anti-Muslim sentiment in general?
Well, back even a few years ago, there were more and more people like on social media who were, talking about the Rohingya as not being Burmese, and so that was kind of spreading through social media. It was very disturbing to see that. But more and more with the 969, I would actually talk to people about this on the ground when I was there, and people told me that there are on every street corner they have these they're kind of like little platforms with decorations of Buddhist monks, and they were saying some people were telling me that this is where the monks go, and they actually it's sort of like organized where there is. I like to believe that the religion itself, they are not it's a very loving religion, and it wouldn't exclude people like that. But I also know that the government is a devout Buddhist, and they spend a lot of money, giving money to temples, and so I think that that expression of wanting the Rohingyas to go, I think the average people that I've met, I don't sense that prejudice in them about the Muslims. And just, again, I don't speak the language, but obviously I'm relying on people that speak English. But I spend a lot of time, talking to people about, what's happening there, and I think that they're being honest when they tell me that, this is not happening from the everyday people, but more from the government.
Is that you form this kind of connection with tourists when Buddhism?
Well, I lived in Brazil for 2 years. It's quite a long time ago. So I've worked in Brazil quite a bit, and I did a web documentary about Brazil. All of this work, by the way, if you go to Hiller Photo, you'll see all of these different projects that I've published. And I also, before Burma, from 2000, for 9 months. And Bangladesh is on the border with Burma. And it's very curious that they're neighbors, but they know very little about each other. And part of that tension, perhaps, is the religion. But it's another country that's very close to my heart that I had actually a much longer period of time to be there on a day-to-day basis. So I got to know people more and more. So just to end, I'll just talk a little bit about the book and the Kickstarter and how that all came about, because that was a huge amount of time and work that went into it. So I came back in 2013 from Burma. It was this time of the year. And I was actually planning to do the book about Bangladesh. I was actually working with a designer in New York. And she said to me, oh, you really need to think about doing the Kickstarter, because, I run this blog for the past 7 years. It's called Verve Photo. And this blog, I've featured close to 1,000 documentary photographers from around the world. It's just a labor of love that I really want to do. And so I have a pretty good following amongst people out there in the online world. And so we did the Kickstarter, and so the first step is, where to begin. I had close to 100,000 images from all of these trips. Some of them were on film, on Kodachrome, which was the most challenging part. The digital was much easier, because at least they were digitized. So where to begin? The book has 172 photographs, edited down from close to 100,000. And we divided the book up. And then again, so how are you going to structure the book? Is it just going to be a portfolio of images? No, we wanted to do something more. We wanted to, I personally love to read, and I wanted to have some interviews that supported, that kind of told the backstory of the photographs. So you're looking at these pictures, and maybe like for some people it's like, well, they're beautiful, I like them, but well, what's going on? So the 6 people in the book were interviewed by a very good journalist. His name is Francis Wade, who I had met and worked with over in Burma. I assigned him to find the 6 leading voices of Burmese people. 4 of them were political prisoners, and the other 2 who weren't political prisoners were living outside of the country, okay? So that tells you a little bit about what life was like there. Tant Minh U is the grandson of U Thant. He was the UN representative back in the day, in the 60s, and he is doing a lot of work to preserve the architecture in Burma. There are 2 women that were political prisoners who are very active right now. So they talk a little bit about what life is like, how things are changing there. We got those interviews together. We had to edit those interviews. And then the production started, laying the book out and finding a way to get the book printed. So I should point this out. This is not a precious art book. I know self-published books right now, it's quite common. A lot of people are doing it, and they're publishing limited editions. But that was not what I wanted to do. We printed 1,500 of them, which is a pretty respectable print run. And in other words, it's a trade publication. And I think it's a book that's very timely, especially since what's been happening right now in Burma, and elections are going to supposedly happen in November. So the news, you know how it is in the United States. We only kind of pay attention to things when they sort of directly affect it, when they kind of have a scoop for the story. And so because of the elections, there'll be an angle for the United States to report on. So we'll be hearing more about Myanmar. And frankly, nobody really knows what is going to happen. Things can blow up anytime. You know, it can happen tomorrow. It just could be a spark that sets something off. And that would be very sad if that did happen, but it's certainly not out of the question. And it's those same generals who are in power right now. They have 25% of the office that controls the government, and they control who can vote. So it's certainly not completely democratic right now. And so that was another important reason for wanting to do this book right now, is to help people, give them a picture of, you know, what's happening, daily life, how people live, what they're thinking about, what they're talking about. That goes a little bit, you know, outside of the headlines that we read in the newspapers. So it's been exciting to do the book, and the Burmese community has been very excited about the book as well. Here in the States, there's going to be an exhibit at Fort Wayne, which has the largest Burmese population, in March 2016, and then there'll be a traveling exhibit of the work in exhibit form after that. So I encourage you to take a look at the book, and thanks for coming.
Thanks everyone for coming. I already announced what we're doing next Monday, which is the Curiosity Club at Hollywood Theater. I hope we see you guys all there. It's really exciting. And then let's just have another round of applause for Geoffrey. And sorry, but right before that, do come up and check out the book, because the projector doesn't do justice to the photos. And I'll turn on the lights in here so you can actually see. All right, thanks. Now, a round of applause for Geoffrey.
Yeah, it has. I don't know if I mentioned. Yeah, the book is actually ironically, the book is being distributed in Burma.